Hey everybody, welcome to Movies We're Talking About, where we talk and talk and talk and talk about movies. I am John Carlos, and today I am joined by a new special guest. When we started this thing a million years ago, and by we I mean me, I've had Eddie on a lot. I've had BJ on a few times. I always wanted to have more people on. So my dear friend Craig, who I've known since
Oh,
I was, I think, definitely a senior, maybe a junior. I forget
yeah,
how many.
a little bit, yeah, because I started with that crowd, like they when you would have been a junior is when they like pulled me into OSHA, like
Freshman?
when I was a freshman, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you're 2 grades, yeah. So that's, well over 20 years of my life.
Yes.
Even
We're
though
not
you're here, I will speak of you in the third person right now. He is the co-creator of thiscinematiclife.com and has two collections of his writings published that you can get on Amazon in
yeah.
paperback, like a real book.
Hmm.
I will say them now. Regimen, 5 years of the Cinematic Life, and Crate Digging, B-sides, rarities, and outtakes from this Cinematic Life. You like to talk about movies.
Yeah, you could say that.
Why we're friends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because even going back to high school, I was like my senior year.
Hmm.
And I remember you were wearing a taxi driver shirt.
Yeah,
And I
that
pulled
was
aside to
in
my
my
buddy. To that point, there wasn't like a million internet sites where you just order a shirt from literally any movie you could imagine.
mhm.
I'm like, hey, that guy's got a taxi driver shirt. He's pretty cool.
Yeah. I
That's all
think
it took.
yeah, I think I got that one. I hung out with lots of skaters, and there was like the skater movie rotation, like in skate shops. It was
Hmm.
like Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Taxi Driver, Repo Man, like the stuff that you could easily buy a shirt or
Yeah.
a poster from. And so I'm pretty sure like Bionic Records and Tapes or Furnace Skateboards is where that
Hmm.
came from.
Yeah. I remember when Bionic split into two and they had their own skate shop.
Yep.
But we're here to talk about Lost Highway. I messaged you a while ago saying, "Hey, if you're going to be on the show, what are some movies you feel like you could talk about?" And like it felt like you had the answer, just like boom, Lost Highway, um, which we saw together at the Frida.
You get into the debate, because I know that you tend to. I mean, you obviously you do the Bond, you've done the Bond series here and stuff, but I know that horror is a particular favorite touchstone, and then the eternal debate of are David Lynch films horror or not. So I knew I was getting into some nebulous territory, but me and my twin, I had to go the Lynch route.
And I don't have any Lynch clothes. Isn't that sad? Yeah.
Need to correct that.
And one day.
It was funny. I have a shirt that I hardly wear. It's yellow. It's David Lynch did a series of shirts. They're like photos that he took, and it's like a photo of like a flower, but it's on a bright yellow shirt. I almost wore that. We almost, ended up with a double yellow thing going on.
Could have been matchy. Damn it, damn it.
Mhm.
Yeah, Lost. I mean, I hesitate to really consider anything Lynch truly horror. I know some people will put Eraserhead in that category, but I mean, I would, if you're gonna inch anything closer to that label, I would consider Lost Highway
I
borderline.
mean,
Well,
Firewalk with Me. I mean,
it does get
serial murder.
and just gets flat out horrific.
Hmm.
Um, but I will say that Robert Blake's Mystery Man in this
Hmm.
is horror. Even
Yeah.
when this movie came out in theaters, they used to play just the clip of him and Fred talking, and just that clip out of context unsettled me. And all this time since
Hmm.
'97, in my head, I have a list of things that scare me.
Hmm.
Uh, Movies are one thing, but I'm talking about just specific things. And
Yeah.
one of them to this day is just Robert Blake with no eyebrows, just like grinning and not blinking in the middle of a
Mhm.
well lit room. Like, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it.
Well,
It
just don't
works.
invite him.
Well, I definitely don't have to worry about that now. So,
Or do you?
yeah. Oh, God. No, that's the thing about him is just the simplicity of his outfit and just the fact that he's in a party. Like, I have a real big thing about spaces that you think are safe
Mhm.
and then they aren't. Usually broad daylight in the middle of suburbia. and you feel like in a party, just the fact that all the noise drops out,
Mhm.
and just as like, yeah, I just forget the context of what he means in the greater picture of the movie. I'm talking about just aesthetics, like the dumbest, simplest version of like, ew, I don't like that man, get him away. He's always gotten under my skin
Yeah.
in a way that like Leatherface or any other thing has never gotten under my skin. I have dumb things that get under my skin. Not dumb, but like here's one that I'm stand by it. You may laugh, but I mean it, and I'm dead serious. The white chicks and white chicks.
Okay, I could see that. Yeah.
The the makeup on them is just so ghoulish.
Mhm.
And there's a comedy, and everyone in the scene is acting like these are in fact white chicks, and I just go, no, these are ghouls.
Mhm.
And I just, if I ever saw them at the end of a hallway, like that's far scarier to me than anything like The Shining. So yeah, Robert Blake, the white chicks.
Yep.
Bleh. But I think the first question I have for you, first real
Mhm.
question is, what the fuck's happening in this movie?
So
I joke. I'm not
I
that
mean,
dumb, but
yeah.
it
Well,
is.
what I've
There's
always liked about David Lynch is, well, because I mean, I like movies. I like, dumb shit. I like Biodome.
yeah.
I like, but what makes movies special for me is movies that can only be done as movies, like language, shot, 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 and then some cumulative effect of those shots. Shots that on their own might not have any sort of effect on a person, but this image and then that image and then that image has an effect that you can't even you sound dumb if you try to put it into words like, well, it's about you but like on just like this instinctual level you can get something out of, and that you can't even really quantify. But so that's what those are the movies I like, and I've always liked David Lynch for that reason, because I feel, well, because I've read his books about like creativity, Catching the Big Fish. He wrote a book on like transcendental meditation and just general creativity, and he'll talk about like that he'll get an idea, and then he'll be going about his life, and then another idea will come to him, and he's like, oh, that idea could connect to this idea, and so you got just you're subtly building like this, like train cars almost. And the films are kind of like train cars for me. Just if you watch it, if you just let it wash over you, it makes some sort of sense. um I sound insane describing this. um
Well,
but
actually, but you don't.
yeah. um so I mean, if you want to go back to it, he said that the initial idea was he was inspired by the O.J. Simpson murders. That was big in L.A. culture in the mid '90s. Just the disconnect of O.J. presumably having done this horrible double murder, and then going golfing. How can somebody who has done something horrific live with themselves, or and so he heard about the idea of a psychogenic fugue.
Oh yeah, I hear that all the time connected to
Yeah.
this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, where the brain, essentially the brain protecting itself. um so it's just, he's this jealous asshole who is insecure about himself. You got that shot where like when he and Patricia Arquette are having sex, and she like pats him on the back, and they really like his, it really shatters his male ego, and the fact that she doesn't want to come with him to the club that night. Like, why is she staying home? What is she doing there? It lets this jealousy breed in him, and he ends up murdering his wife and getting sentenced to uh, death. And then while he's in jail, he becomes Balthazar Getty. And
Now, everything you're saying so far to me is within the text of the movie undeniable.
Yeah.
The further along you go, it becomes a little more nebulous than that.
Well, because I would say that the veil is starting to break. Like when,
Yes.
so there's some people who believe that these are the last thoughts going through his head as he's being executed. Like because he is sentenced to the electric chair.
And it
And
starts with him and the electrical, if you want to call it that, the flashing lights, and then it
yeah.
ends with it.
And then you got him kind of where he's going all like the makeup effects at the end where he's kind of like putrid looking in the car. Is that him like melting in the electric chair? Um,
to which I would say, yeah, at least my take on it.
mhm,
The ending one feels like an electric chair.
mhm,
The catalyst for him first becoming Balthazar Getty,
mhm,
I personally don't think that's also the electric
mhm,
chair, and that this whole thing is just a matter of seconds.
mhm. Yeah.
I just like to think it's more of between the earlier headaches and looking at lights and Lynch's pattern of like, oh, when lights happen, or if you're near an electrical current, that's usually a point of transformation of some
Yeah.
kind. Uh,
Electricity.
However, I only think that, and pretty much the whole point of today's conversation is just the fact that I've seen this movie, I think in total, maybe 5 times.
Mhm. Probably
I
about the
don't,
same amount for
I
me.
don't fully exactly know 100% what's happening.
Mhm,
And my opinion has changed from viewing to viewing.
mhm.
And I know everyone's got their own take on it. Lord knows there's plenty of essays about it. But to me, that's half of the fun is I don't think I ever want to have a definitive version in my head of what's going on.
Well, because that's another thing about Lynch that I appreciate is so I've been told or I've heard or I've been told that what a dream is. So your brain wants to create order. Just your brain like wants to narrativize things to and that's why I what it is great about a David Lynch movie is my brain is going like okay, I'm connecting these dots. Um but so your brain wants to create order. So like when you are dreaming, your brain is essentially like powering down from the night. And so you got some stray synapses firing like from your day, like, oh, I remember that. I remember that. And then your brain is working and like, oh, I need to make sense out of these firing, synapses. And that's what your dream is. Part of that desire of your brain to, you know, make things make sense is also how like earworms happen. Like you remember a piece of a song and then it gets stuck in your head because your brain is trying to finish it. Your
Hmm.
brain is going like, but what's the next line? Or, oh yeah, that's was the what line goes into it? What line comes out of it? Your brain is just working this thing over. And David Lynch films are like that in that they're unknowable, like that there is maybe key element missing, and that makes it stick in your brain more because then your brain is going back to it and working over it over it again and again. Like it's an imperfect thing, and therefore it's a perfect thing because you can go back to it and obsess about it and go over it again and again.
Yeah, I hesitate to make it sound like homework or something, but there's obviously huge percentage of film that is meant to be digested in a very certain kind of way. And then there's people who use the medium of film and create something with not the normal sense of rules and structure of what
Mm.
a quote unquote movie is.
Yeah.
And I think Lynch is one of the more accessible people who can, I don't want to say like his movies are hits, but like your average Joe still knows his name
Yes.
and maybe has seen like Blue Velvet or Twin
Mm.
Peaks, but still manages to create something. And this is where I'm going to sound dumb, but somewhere in my teens or early 20s, it hit me just like how much his films, quote unquote, feel dreamlike. And then as you get older and realize that, you're not the first person to think of that. Not claiming to be like, but I remember as a little
Mhm.
kid, the first time I watched Empire Strikes Back and realized like, oh, this one's my favorite, and here's why. And then you
Mhm.
get older and like everyone's favorite is Empire, and here's why.
Mhm.
So I'm just saying that that opinion isn't new,
Mhm.
but there, he's one of the few, American filmmakers to me that really has the closest thing I could say to a unique voice.
Yep.
I'm sure one could tell you, well, actually, but that's why I say closest thing to.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of it has to do with sound design, performance, mood, but
Mhm.
also, like you're saying, the fact that so much of it is intentionally, I don't mean like an M. Night Shyamalan, I'm going to trick you kind of way, but just
Yeah.
like an intentionally vague,
Mhm.
it forces your brain to make those connections the way it does when it's dreaming, which is why I consider his films so quote unquote dreamlike, is because I react to them the way I do while I'm in a dream,
Mhm.
sometimes trying to make sense of it, but also sometimes just going with it. And then when you wake up or when the movie's over, going, I went with that like it made sense, but that doesn't make any sense. Let me try to figure out why could that make sense. Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the title of Lynch's own semi-autobiography, his authorized biography that he also contributed to, is called Room to Dream. Like that's the title of the book, and
That's perfect.
his work leaves Room to Dream.
I think it's interesting that you had Firewalk with Me
Mhm.
and this, which
Where
seem like uh, he found something a little more nonlinear than what you saw with like Blue Velvet before that.
yeah,
And
Firewalk. Yeah,
but
Firewalk
then
was the start of a
it's the start.
mhm,
This feels like he's really gelling it into something.
mhm,
And then
the straight
Straight
story.
Story
Yeah.
right after this.
Mhm.
And then almost like a giant pendulum swing, then we go back to
Yes.
like Lost Highway dialed up to 11 for like what seems to be the rest of his career.
Yeah. Well, because also a lot of people consider this like us the start of a trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Take out Straight Story and Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and Inland Empire. It's this trilogy of films set in Los Angeles about like disassociation of multiple personalities, etc. And so yeah, this is the starting point definitely for
And
that.
I mean, one could argue also maybe just the purest as far as this was set out to be a film
Mhm.
from initial conception,
Oh yeah, so then
whereas the
because
other two.
Mulholland was a TV show and Inland was a series of shorts or experiments and
Mhm.
stuff.
So as
Definitely.
far, yeah, as far as that intention, uh,
Well,
it's
he wrote this one with Barry Gifford,
mhm.
who wrote the book Wild at Heart that he adapted. Where do you stand on Wild at Heart?
um, there are two Lynch movies I haven't seen:
Okay,
Wild at Heart, Inland Empire.
okay,
So
two very hard.
I have to get back to you on that.
Yeah. Wild at Heart's one that I bumped up against. So this was the very first Lynch film I ever saw, Lost Highway. Came out 97, so I was seventh grade. Didn't see it till video, so probably about 98, eighth grade. My best friends being middle schoolers, I'm like, okay, I hear this has nudity in it, and also it's got a Marilyn Manson cameo. All right, I'm in. That's all, my middle school brain. And then like 5 minutes in, I'm like, what the fuck is this? I've compared it to like Kyle MacLachlan's character Jeffrey Beaumont in Blue Velvet. He sneaks into a woman's closet thinking he's going to see some titties, and he gets a whole lot more.
Yeah.
And with Lost Highway was like, okay, I'm gonna see, there's gonna be some rock music. Trent Reznor, helped out here, and there's gonna be some boobies, and whoa, and then so this was my entry point for Lynch. And then a couple years later, they used to do the Widescreen Film Festival at
Yes.
Cal State Long Beach. showed, friggin' nice CinemaScope prints, like in a huge, like, the Karen Carpenter Theater. That is big ass. I mean, it's meant to be a stage
Yeah.
show, not but yeah. So I saw in one night Blue Velvet and The Elephant Man in the same night, and I'm like, okay, I'm in on this guy. And then I rented Wild at Heart from the local library and watched that. I'm like, it felt almost like a parody of Lynch to me at the time. Like, I'm like, what's going on here? Like, this feels like he's really trying hard or something. But like over the years, I've actually aged into that movie.
Hmm.
Like, well, I think, not to get political, but living through the Trump era, that movie makes a lot more sense to me. I mean, and that movie came at the end of, a decade of Reagan and Bush. And so just like this movie about the world is awful, all there is like brutal violence and, people dying by the side of the road and sexual assault and everything, like it makes sense to me now. Like, but at the time I did not care for Wild at Heart. Um, how did I even get to Wild at Heart? Oh, Barry Gifford. Barry Gifford.
Yeah.
I can track my. I wanted to be able to at least figure out where I began with this. Okay.
Because like Lost Highway is like a sentence in his book.
Yeah. Mr. Eddie. The name Mr. Eddie is also in one of his books as well. And so, he's like, all right, we're gonna make a movie together.
I'm glad you brought up like your history with Lynch because my history was somewhat similar. I didn't even know in advance, like, ooh, titties, but yeah, there's always certain R-rated movies that you maybe only know for certain checkpoints and not what you're getting into. But I used to do children's theater, and it was like me and this other kid were like 13 when like the other kids we hung out, like we were the two young kids that hung out with all the 15, 16-year-olds. And we went over, we used to like rent movies and hang out. And they had rented a couple of movies, including not Lost Highway, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. I saw it, I think, at 13 or 14 years old.
Okay.
Had no business seeing Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me at all at that age, let alone with no context from the show at all.
Yeah.
So my little 13-year-old brain just saw some sexy sex and some black and white floor stuff and I Am the Arm, and I didn't understand what the hell I was watching, but
the monkey and
yeah, all that. So that definitely set the stage for me to at least know as I got older, like, oh, David Lynch, he's the guy who did that fucked up movie you didn't understand when you were 13. But I already knew, as the kids said today, it was a vibe, and at least that's one thing I could always talk about, like his. I am not, my IMDb brain does not catalog who he always works with, but whoever his sound team are, I feel like no other director has a greater control over his soundscape or their soundscape and their effective soundscape. And specifically beyond score or anything is the complete absence. Like no one but Lynch has nothing that actually sounds like his nothing.
Yeah.
And his it's a very unique flavor of silence that really gets under my skin.
I love the sound of fire in David Lynch movies.
We only have like the one real like fireplace shot in this one, I think.
Fire. Yeah, fire.
So one of the things that I'm just going to cut to like the biggest thing, my biggest takeaway from the whole movie is because I've gone a few different ways with Fred's story for Act 1, becoming Pete Dayton for Act 2, and what that actually is, and whether it is purely a fantasy dreamscape, like escaping where you're at, if it is recalling events that got you there, if it's the recalled events that got you there through an incredibly warped perception, if it's a blend of an escapist fantasy mixed with justification of past events. And then beyond that, I guess my next big issue is what I consider, I don't want to call it Act 3, but once Pete is Fred again, the thing that I keep kind of playing with is what exactly is going on there, because I have a few different ideas. But I don't know how you feel about what I consider to be Act 2. Because the thing that I kind of keep going back and forth on is, like, I think for a while I always presumed it was just a fantasy informed by truth. And now the older I get, the more I watch it, the more I think this is all like maybe 70% a skewed retelling of his past.
Maybe. Yeah, because one of the things that I think about with the Balthazar Getty parts is the first time Mr. Eddie brings the car in, and he pulls out his little wrench and he just like tweaks some things in the connection between an engine and a brain. Like, oh, something is wrong with this brain, something is wrong with this engine. Like, oh, but you can just a little tweak and it would just be fine. Just like, and because he's got his own little head injury because and stuff like that. So some sort of a correlation between head trauma and brains and the machinery of a car or a car engine.
Well, and the fact that it's Mr. Eddie's car, how are you with the notion that it's not just Pete that is an extension of Fred, but that Mr. Eddie is too, or that many characters are all parts of Fred?
That could be. I mean, because
if it is, the fact that it's Mr. Eddie's car and that little piece is also an extension of Fred and his little piece.
Yeah, so they're warring factions within one person's psyche. The angry, jealous part, personified for, and then you got okay. I could chew on that. I hadn't really occurred to me, but I like where you're headed.
Yeah, because God, I don't even know where to start. But yeah, it's one of the things that's sort of occurred to me is that that Pete is the fantasy. He's good with cars, therefore he's cool, and he's young. And he fucks. Like, and I'm not quite sure if he was ever quite cheated on, but that fact that he thinks he was, now he gets to be the cheater. And instead of having his wife stolen, now he gets to steal someone's wife.
Yeah.
But also the idea of Renee, like his imaginary version of her is Alice. Like he's still like Renee is married to him, so like the fantasy of like she's got to be married to someone. Well, it can be my possessive, violent, jealous version of me. Like he's casting it in the right way.
Okay.
I also happen to think that in a weird way, the Mystery Man is also maybe not necessarily an outside force, but is also a part of him. And even if it's not a part of him, it's an outside force that I think it's really, really easy to just say he's a force of evil, but I do think he is a force for the manifestation of jealousy.
Well, because he, one of the important lines for me with regards to that character is that you invited me.
Yes.
Like
I'm hoping you're going to say what I think you're going to say.
What? Just
go on.
No, go on. It's just that you invited him. That you, like, just like a vampire. You have,
yeah. But specifically, I think it's exactly, though, if you want to pinpoint it to exact moment, besides just his internal jealousy and mistrust, it's like the night he calls from the club to see if she's home and she's not. That mistrust, I'm like, you are literally, that is you inviting him. When we met at your house, it's the phone ringing inside his house that to me, is it. So,
yeah.
Uh, so to me, there's a lot to unpack in the third act
Mhm.
if Mr. Eddie is an extension of Fred. Um,
I'm also interested in the final. Well, they thread it throughout the movie. The use of the Mortal Coil song "Song of the Siren."
mhm.
Um, it is used heavily there at the end, but it's used throughout. That's like a ton. Lynch wanted that song in
Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet, yes, but he could not get the rights. It was too expensive. And so Angelo Badalamenti said, "Hey, I know this woman named Julie Cruz. Let's throw together a song. We can do kind of a sound alike." And that's where they got was it Mysteries of Love from Blue Velvet, and his whole relationship with Julie Cruz that leads into the Twin Peaks theme song and so on and so forth began there. But just that he had fixated on this song, and because I think about where it was used in Blue Velvet versus how it's used here, um, and I wonder if it mutated over time for him. Like, he heard the song and he wanted to use it in Blue Velvet in this one way, and by the time he finally gets to use it, he uses it in this other way. Um, but like, is that the like Renee theme, or like, is it something
Or is it the Alice theme? Because
yes.
in theory, if your true siren is this beautiful thing that's beckoning you, and then ultimately,
Well, she says, "You'll never have me."
yeah, and basically where she turns,
Mhm.
that's appropriate. I'm glad you brought that up. It's one of the few little bits of trivia of that deep rabbit hole,
Mhm.
trying to connect dots bullshit that I love about Dave Lynch movies. Is that one of the lyrics is "Were you here when I was full sail?"
Mhm.
And when they're at Andy's party, and he goes to the bar and gets the two shots,
Mhm.
there's a Full Sail beer bottle on the counter,
Oh.
and it's like, is that supposed to mean something?
Uh-huh.
Because full sail, because when Pete looks over at the neighbor's little kiddie pool, there's a sailboat.
Mm.
Ah,
Well, and to jump around also, like, with your read, you know, a, a an intention into all of this. I was just re-listening to the audiobook of Room to Dream, just the sections about Lost Highway and the shack, the little shack at the end. It wasn't supposed to blow up. That was improvised. Like
oh,
like they had the shack. The shack was a location and a thing, but they talk about like Lynch asking the guy like, "Oh, what are you gonna do with the shack after we're done?" He's like, "Oh, we're gonna knock it down." He's like, "Could we blow it up?" And then hastily thrown together, like, let's get some pyrotechnics and stuff. But like, it was just supposed to be like, a location. And I mean, I guess presumably, Patricia Arquette would have gone into it, or I don't. I'm wondering what like the script looked like. What was the intention? Like it blowing up feels so part of a piece
yes.
of this movie, and to think that that was not in the original conception is kind of wild.
But I love when stuff like that happens. When
Yeah.
I think about like the things where like I often joke about like the cinematic gods of fate willed
Mhm.
a thing to happen.
Yeah.
Uh, that very well could be one of them.
Hmm.
Um, and that there's very specific examples, and there's I think one of the most obvious ones is like the shark in fucking Jaws doesn't work good. And all right, well, let's find a way to shoot around it.
Hmm.
Um,
Shark is still working.
Another reason why I buy into the idea of Mr. Eddie as an extension of Fred is that
Hmm.
obviously in this fantasy world he's married to Alice and Fred was married to Renee. But at
Hmm.
one point when he's talking to Pete and he's like, remember the girl who was here the other day? She
Hmm.
stayed in the car.
Hmm.
And the fact that when Fred and Renee get home from the party and he thinks someone's in the apartment. He tells her to stay in the car and she doesn't. So I love that in the fantasy. It's so minute, but the fact that in quote unquote reality, she gets out of the car. So in the fantasy, she stays in the car. And there's little crumbs all over that, I don't know, support things like that. If you want them to.
She's an obedient wife in the fantasy world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the more I think about it, the more I want to think about how pretty much everyone in the fantasy world is some sort of extension or wish. Because you can obviously talk about Pete, you can talk about Alice, duh. There's something to be said about the mystery man being an extension of his murderous drive and the manifestation of his jealousy. There's something to be said about his girlfriend, Sheila, is a brunette with black nail polish, but she's incredibly loyal, and you don't have to worry about her. And she's pretty much the opposite of Renee. Even to a certain degree, his parents all feel like just extensions of Fred.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't until this most recent viewing that I even started to allow myself. I used to often wonder when you look at things so literally, because he doesn't just sort of wake up as Pete. He like transforms into him, and we really play up the idea that Pete had a life before we and Fred are coming into the movie of his life. And just they often refer to about that night. Ooh, that night. For the longest time, I didn't understand what that night was. I accepted it as maybe the night he transformed. But I've watched the movie twice this week. Have seen the movie more than 5 times. Okay, anyway, so twice this week, and it only clicked this time the idea that they said he wasn't alone. He was with a man that he hasn't seen before. And if the mystery man is like the passenger with him, and this is a long way of saying that if the mystery man is the presence of murder, that in this fantasy, the night that they don't want to speak of is essentially the night that he murdered Renee. And that's why his dad's like leaning forward and saying, like, but we don't talk about that. Whether they truly understand that's what it is, but there's something literally in the emotion of it that feels like that's the anchor.
Your read on this is totally new to me, but by you having it or explaining it, it's bringing up things in me. Well, I haven't watched it. There's a documentary that's screened at some festivals and is going to be coming out called Lynch/Oz, or it's about the influence of the Wizard of Oz on David Lynch, and his cinema, and just talking about the idea of people representing things and stuff. I was just thinking of literally, and you were there, and you were there, and like. And then also even thinking about that the transition scene when he transforms in the context of the tornado in Wizard of Oz.
Oh,
and
totally.
All the things like rushing by the window, and stuff like that. It's pinging things in my brain.
I like that. Now I'm gonna have to go watch this again just to think about that.
But I'm excited to check that doc out. I think it's the same guy who made that documentary entirely about the shower scene in Psycho.
Yeah. They also did Room 237, didn't they?
No, I think that's a different one.
Different person. Okay.
The 237, like that doc about sleep paralysis. And
the nightmare.
Yeah, and then also about how we live in a simulation. But Yeah, I like this route you're going with
Yeah, well,
I dig.
it's for the longest time, I the thing that always got me that I'm starting to come to terms with a bit.
Mhm.
It's funny. I thought I was be asking you what was your take, and I keep rambling on and on about my take.
That's
But
fine.
no, at the very beginning of the movie with the intercom, Pete
Mhm.
Laurence is dead.
Yeah.
Movie watching tells me that this is linear. That scene happens, and then the next scene happens, the next scene happens. So by
Mhm.
the time you get to the end,
Mhm.
where what I consider to be Fred slash Pete, because he's still dressed like Pete, tells on the intercom Pete Laurent is dead. You know, the first time I saw it at what, like 17 or 18, I'm just like, what the fuck time loop bullshit is this? I don't get it. Um, my bigger question is it's not a time loop,
Mhm.
but I started to wonder, is this one of the is this just a non-linear scene where the beginning of the first scene of the movie isn't the first scene of our story?
Oh,
The first
okay.
scene of the story is the next scene, and that maybe we're just as we're coming to the end of the movie and the end of Fred's story, we
Mhm.
get to see maybe what he wanted to be the receiving end, like a sense of closure that I wanted this message to go to me.
Mm.
Or did that scene actually happen in the beginning? But by the
Mhm.
time we get to the end of the movie, he's now imagining, he's recasting himself as the messenger.
Mhm.
Uh, I still like to personally think that this is going to sound weird because he's such a bastard. I
Uh-huh.
like to think that he is telling himself that.
Mhm.
The opening scene is just a non-linear placement,
Mhm.
but that at the 0 hour, after recounting everything and about to die in the electric chair, he's managed to kill off the worst part of himself.
He's finally successful, but too late because he's gonna be fried.
Too late.
Yeah.
This is me trying to make sense out of something that I don't know was ever to be made sense of, but I do get a sense of if you are trying to tell a quote unquote arc,
Mhm.
um, essentially the second act of the movie is him kind of working through his bullshit. Well, you could view it that way.
So much of David Lynch is, the fact that he has been a long time practitioner of transcendental meditation. He has the David Lynch Foundation to teach, transcendental meditation in schools, and also possibly relevant to this is the David Lynch Foundation also helps veterans by teaching them transcendental meditation. People who have been through war and have post-traumatic stress disorder, and meditation as a means of resolving that, of dealing with inner trauma. And so is though not through transcendental meditation, is you know um Bill Pullman's character having a long night of the self. He's like
Hmm.
finally, maybe he is meditating on some level, and this is where his brain goes.
Uh, I like that a lot.
uh,
um,
and then
another,
I wanted to get your thought on this. You know, looping back to what I was just talking about trauma and stuff. I think a lot about trauma with this film. It's almost inescapable because you've got it's inspired by the O.J. Simpson story. Um, you've got the daughter of Natalie Wood, so death under mysterious circumstances, and if you want to go further back, also her rape potentially at the hands of Kirk Douglas. Um, you've got Richard Pryor and his setting himself on fire suicide attempt. You've got Jack Nance, the from Eraserhead onward in David Lynch movies. This was their last pairing as he died under mysterious circumstances after this. You got Robert Blake, who goes on to murder his wife, or allegedly. Um, you've got what's it? What's Lynch's assistant, or was she his? She worked for Lynch or around Lynch. Um, I'm totally blanking on her name, but she was Keanu Reeves's girlfriend who
Oh,
died. And she died leaving Marilyn Manson's house. Marilyn Manson in the movie. Um,
all
yeah,
sorts of trauma there.
exactly. And then just like it's this weird epicenter from there's like it's and Gary Busey in a motorcycle accident, back in the late 70s or whenever. Um, it's just this nexus of trauma, like in this movie, both stuff that happened before the movie and stuff that happened after the movie. But
After.
like
Yeah.
it's weird, like, and even I don't know if it was intentional, but when what's his name, the guy that try to rob, the porn guy with
Yeah,
this,
Andy.
yeah, him dying when he with the glass table made me think of William Holden died. He was drunk and bled out. So like it's just like so much like Hollywood lore and trauma all bundled up in one movie, and pretty much I'm sure not intentionally, but
No.
it's
But to a certain degree, it might be because I mean, do you buy into there is like a theory because so much of Act One is all about Fred
Mhm.
and to what degree of insecure is he versus to what degree like you don't see him be violent, but like there are signs. And do you buy into the signs that also that Renee has already been abused by him?
Oh,
Just the quiet. I mean, it's easy if you look at just the idea of she doesn't want to go out to the club that night, and it's all about him being upset about her not going, but never
mhm.
thinking about, but why does she not want to go?
Mhm.
And the fact that when she calls the police, it's her call and him pacing. There's so many times where his answers with the police are short and she has to speak for them. The
Mhm.
police at one point separate her from them to
Well, and
get. There's a lot of little cues if you want to see them that
yeah,
she's already experienced trauma.
and then videotape. Um, he likes to remember things his own way. Um,
Well, that's one of the biggest things I'm grappling with is for the longest time, I always accepted that act one of the movie is the truth. Well, to a certain degree, it's not a fantasy.
mhm.
But if he's playing around and scrambling bits and repurposing, reliving moments and also scrambling them in the fantasy, how much of act one is that reliable to begin with?
Mhm. Well, I mean, Act One still features, the Mystery Man. I mean, it
That's why I think
culminates.
the mystery man is a part of him
Yeah,
because he's
it,
always
I
going to
mean,
be there.
it culminates that like when it goes to Murder Town, disappears into a corner.
Mm-hmm.
He like pocket dimension almost. Like, yeah, that's yeah.
Well, and there's two shadowy figures that cross the living room. I like to imagine that's him and not to get too dextery, but it feels like that's his dark passenger, essentially his murder devil on his shoulder.
Mhm.
I don't know. I just started thinking about the idea of how much of this first act is already him remembering it the way he wants to
Mhm.
before we even get to a fantasy where he gets to work through his issues or just fever dream it. Like the fact that when we get to the very end of the movie and we see like the little sex party and Mr. Eddie is with Renee and she looks like Renee. You
Mhm.
see some shots of the porn of her laying on the couch where she's in these heels, and it's the same heels she's wearing like in every scene
Mhm.
in Act One. So how much again can we rely on this actually being? Are we just seeing his memory of what Renee always wears?
Mhm.
In his head, she's always wearing these sexy heels from the porn.
Yeah.
The fact that she washes her face and she still has makeup on, she's
Mhm.
always going to look like that.
Hmm.
Not everything can be taken as truth in Act One.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm also glad you brought up. Just a side note, we were talking about Andy and how he dies. I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but when they're at Andy's party and she asks Fred to get her drinks, he takes 2 shots and he takes them both. Later in the movie, when she asks Andy to go down and get her a drink, Pete bludgeons him on the head with the statue, and it leaves
Hmm.
2 marks on his head. Two
Oh,
shots, 2 shots at the bar,
okay.
or one could also argue the statue is shot one, the table is the second shot.
Also
I have to admit,
possible.
yeah.
Well,
Sometimes,
it's yeah,
reading into things is dumb, and then sometimes I think it can be a lot of fun when it comes to stuff like this.
yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Um,
Um.
I have another just random thought, but it popped into my head
Mhm.
recently. I never thought about this until like this week, but I like the idea of this and Eyes Wide Shut as a double feature
Okay.
because
Jealous husband.
jealous husband, but also how much of this is your own fucking imagination? Because there's a version of this where Renee was never cheating on you.
Yeah.
You just
Well,
think
and then
she
you also
is. And then you
well,
go
and then you
down
also
this odyssey, this this insecure speculation of I met him at Moke's and he got me a job. And did she
well, and then
even
in
really
both
get a job that involves stripping and a gun to her head, or is this all just Tom Cruise imagining Nicole Kidman fucking a sailor?
yeah. Well, and then in both of those situations, both Eyes Wide Shut and this, you got like these the corridors of power. You got like mafia and the uber rich, the power, the the Epstein adjacentness of.
Yeah. And they both have sexy parties
Mhm.
with creepy ass music.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I buy it. I buy it. That would be quite a
Yeah.
double feature.
There's
Well, because
enough
I was
there.
I well yeah. Well, because I do well, you follow me on Instagram. I do double features. Every Friday I post a suggestion of a double or triple feature that I think people should, watch together. And the second one I ever did was Lost Highway, doubled with the John Frankenheimer movie Seconds.
Oh,
Have you seen Seconds?
no, but I'd like Frankenheimer and I do want to get to that one someday.
Because Seconds, it's a middle-aged man who gets the opportunity to essentially fake his own death and have his personality implanted into a younger man played by Rock Hudson. So, you start the movie with this, middle-aged man. He, isn't really feeling his wife anymore. He not fond of his kids, stuff like that. And so he goes to this place and, they'll, oh yeah, we'll pass off this body as yours, it died in a fire, yada yada, and we'll give you reconstructive surgery and we turn you into Rock Hudson and you can go out to California and live the life you've always wanted, another chance at being young. And yeah, you can be a sculptor or whatever the heck he wants to be, but still at his core he's that same guy. So yeah, he looks like young sexy Rock Hudson and he's gallivanting on the beach with sexy blonde woman and stuff, but like that all he changed was the outside. He's still this you know miserable guy inside. And so I saw a lot of similarities between that and Lost Highway in the desire for change, but you know if still at your core you are the same person, there's no fucking point to it.
Huh. Now, I mean, first of all, I want to see now a triple feature of just those three.
Mhm.
But do you have any, I don't want to say like particular take or hot take, but I mean, I've talked a lot about where I think the movie's sort of going, but do you have a particular, like a finite, not like we set out to make sense of this movie, because I think I have no doubt that David Lynch doesn't want it to have a finite, this is what it is. Although I'm sure he has one, but half of the fun is letting you explore that. Do you have like an exploration of like, this is what I get when I watch this. This is what I think, quote unquote, is happening?
Mhm. Um, no, I don't have a definitive reading, and that goes back to what I like about Lynch is, that there's always going to be some unknowability of it. Um, and then also like that, I mean, I'm sure it was said elsewhere, but I always think about it from 12 Monkeys when they go to that movie theater and it's showing Vertigo, and he talks about seeing it as a kid and that he remembered it different or something like that. And then, someone says the movie does, the movie is always, the same length, it's the same shots, it's the same everything, but as you change over the course of your life, how you respond to the work changes.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have different takeaways, even from, watching it, a week apart, a day apart,
I've had my concept of, or at least my trying to make sense of it, has
Mm-hmm.
changed this week alone from when you and I saw it a few months ago, or like
Mm-hmm.
saw it last year.
Yeah.
So I with you there, because
Mm-hmm.
I can literally do that in the span of months.
So I've never been one to try to really narrow it down, just buy the ticket, take the ride, see what it pings in me, in my brain,
Mhm.
this time.
That's cool. I mean, I'll allow it. I'm not saying you're supposed to watch it and try to make sense of it, because even now when I watch it, within any given act of the movie, my brain is kind of taking in three different
Mhm.
levels of what could be happening,
Mhm.
and I'm processing all three at the same time.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I could usually have to do that with other movies for my own bullshit reasons,
Mhm.
like Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2. Like when I watch it, I'm watching the movie they made,
Mhm.
and then also the movie that they intended to make but got edited and chopped up, and I'm processing both at the same time. I have a friend of mine who watches Star Trek 5, and he goes, "Well, I could see both the movie that they were trying to make and the movie they made,"
Mhm.
and that's due to production and my passion for a story, whereas
Mhm.
this is
Vibes.
yeah, so yeah. um I
I
still
love
can't even definitively tell you, and I haven't really gotten into it, but in the second act, how much of it, or if all of it,
Mhm.
is escapism,
Mhm.
recollection, or some mix of the two.
Mhm.
And my brain will lean into one or the other, or all three,
Mhm.
when watching it. So again, I don't know if I'm ever going to have a
Mhm.
definitive thing, but whereas you maybe take the ride, my brain, like, I mean, that's the thing, is in the past I've taken the ride, but these last two viewings, my brain just went, let's try to make sense of it more. And
Well, I mean, you knew that this chat was coming up, so maybe your brain was saying like, "All right,
but I don't think anyone will ever have some. That's the fun of it to me, is
Mhm.
first of all, this movie's been out for, in fact, isn't this year the 25th anniversary?
Last year was.
Last year was.
That's why it got the 4K and the
Yeah.
theatrical re-release and all that.
I mean, I'm not bringing anything new to the table, and it's not new to any Lynch fan that his movies can be up for discussion and interpretation.
I mean,
But
you brought it up to me. I mean, it's new to me, the whole idea of, not just, Balthazar Getty and Bill Pullman being, inverse, but like the idea of of characters, representing other. So you brought
yeah,
that you brought that new to the table.
yeah. Well,
Pat
yay.
yourself on the back, John Carlos.
I did a thing. You know what? That's rare because in I don't want to say like the nature of our friendship, but like the kind of nature of our friendship is that you usually bring something to my mind. I go, thanks for that, Craig.
Yeah, I got the obsessiveness. I I don't. I go down a wormhole. I suddenly learn about something and want to know all about it.
Well, I used to think that it was Fred, Pete, and a few years ago started to really accept Mr. Eddie as a part of him. Only I think today, because I watched it again this afternoon, that I start to accept the Mystery Man as not just a harbinger of the acts of violence, because generally when he shows up is when a murder is about to happen, and specifically the idea of his jealousy. But this is the first time I ever allowed myself to think of him as another part of him, except that part of him is showing up in Act 1 and not just as a fantasy character in part Act 2.
And like walks between worlds. In you think to like a Twin Peaks. You got characters, Black Lodge characters, and the city of Twin Peaks. But then some people move between. You got Mike, the one-armed man. He's an actual person here, a resident of the world, but also of this other world.
So Lynch has a precedent for doing that. So I'm not reaching here, but also besides his jealousy, I also think of it as, I don't know if you could be like a manifestation of like confrontation, but like the truth of things. You're having dreams about murdering your wife. You wake up and you look, and when she looks at you, you see the manifestation of aggression and jealousy there for a moment. He is the truth of your rage that you're unwilling to confront. And the fact that he shows up at all these kind of crucial moments, like he's the one who tells him, like, Alice and Renee, you've been lied to. He's the one who then puts a camera in his face and says, like, who are you? And what does he do? He runs from him. He is running from the truth. He gets in a car and drives away. And quite literally, he is confronting him with, and we haven't even talked about this, but the idea of the videotapes. And it's funny that I mentioned Blair Witch 2, because one of my favorite lines in Blair Witch 2 is that videotape doesn't lie. Film does, but videotape captures the truth. And I don't know, bring in the idea that Fred is blocking out so much of his truth, and that the videotape is how we find out that a murder was committed. And now the videotape being a confrontation, again, it's confronting a truth you don't want to confront. And all I'll say also, the idea that maybe the Mystery Man is an extension of him. It's a little thing, but when Alice and Pete are packing up and getting ready to leave Andy's, she's pulling the gun on him in this very like film noir, don't trust the dame moment. And then, haha, here you go. She tells him to put your gun in your pants. Then when they're about to kill Mr. Eddie, it's the Mystery Man who pulls the gun out of his pants. So I still think there's a connection there, that it's, I mean, even Mr. Eddie looks and acknowledges the two of them. I think the third act, again, how much of the third act is fantasy or recollection? The thing I always took from it is it's not the merging of the two,
Mhm.
But throughout the whole second act of the movie, you have all these what I call intrusions on fantasy. He hears a saxophone on the radio and it gives him the headache.
Mhm.
All these little repeat dialogue beats are the past kind of coming up again.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, when he sees the mystery man, is when he's now transformed back into Fred, but he's still dressed as Pete. And everything from that point forward, Alice looks like Renee. You know, he's accepting also the fact that Alice at that point has effectively disappeared. Like she leaves, goes in the house, the truth is told, and she never appears again. So that's for me in the third act. I'm left to wonder how much of this is flashback of Renee, imagination fantasy of Renee, or some mix of the two, but it's not Alice anymore.
Mhm.
Um,
One thought that I had on the most recent, you talking about the radio and the saxophone, was a big reading I've had on in general on David Lynch is the presence of performance in his films, like scenes where people go, like you got the Club Silencio in Mulholland Drive, you got Dorothy Valens in Blue Velvet, you got Julie Cruz throughout various Twin Peaks incarnations.
Everybody in the fucking Twilight, the Twin Peaks at the end of like each episode of The Return.
Exactly. But so just the idea of performance and um expression, like I think about like opera, um like that people can go see opera, and even if they don't speak Italian, the emotion is so strong
Mm.
that you're able to, okay, what, like why am I crying? I don't speak Italian, I don't know what is going on, but the emotion is so strong in in what you are watching. And so I was thinking about Fred playing the saxophone and viewing that as an expression of what is inside him. Like it's of this aggressive, like discordant, angry, isn't he like he's like kicking, isn't he also like kicking the air ish when he does it? Maybe I'm misremembering. You watched
I
it both.
mean, he is leaning and hunching and rocking back and forth
Yeah,
incredibly.
yeah. So just like that scene as almost uh, the most pure expression of this man, because this is his art. You say about musicals. What was it? When words fail, music speaks, or something like that.
Right.
Stuff like that. So like
And
he's,
then when music fails, dance speaks.
but yeah, just viewing that as its own like little microcosm of who he is. It was just something that I thought about on my most
Hmm.
recent watch.
I'm glad you brought up the sense of performance because that leads me to music.
Mhm.
Uh, I think there's probably got to be a handful of people from a certain generation that like Lost Highway is like the soundtrack to a movie they never saw, but they had Nine Inch Nails and Smashing Pumpkins and David Bowie and Marilyn Manson on it. Like, I mean, I had that soundtrack for a good 3 or 4 years before I ever saw the movie. On paper, like that was a hell of a lineup. And then when I finally saw the movie, because I mean, Perfect Drug is still like an all-time, you know, I listen to that song, at least 5 or 10 times throughout a given year. Um,
Mhm.
and then to know that you get to the movie and the Perfect Drug is used with just this little drum riff, and the main melody of the song
Mhm.
isn't used at all. And it's just, hey, remember when someone just wails on the drums for like 20 seconds? Let's use that in a car chase. And I'm like, that's what the Perfect
Yeah.
Drug is doing on the soundtrack. It's almost comical in the
Mhm.
context of, I mean, the car chase and then the ensuing fight is probably the funniest the movie gets. But
Mhm.
yeah, I just what an interesting because I spent like a good 4 years imagining like what context is this Nine Inch Nails song going to be in the
Mhm.
movie, and it's
But
Marilyn
but
Manson's
but
in the
yeah,
movie.
a lot of the other ones do get yeah. But a lot of the other songs do get more prominently featured, like the that opening to the Smashing Pumpkins song, do, do, do. And then well the Rammstein stuff,
Oh
like
yeah.
flat out like saying the name of the band, Rammstein. Yeah. And then the Bowie song that both bookend, it opens and closes, and that title, I'm deranged,
Hmm.
like speaks a lot there. Um,
I have a question for you,
mhm,
because this is the biggest question I have regarding the third act of the movie. When
mhm,
when when he's no longer seeing Alice, he's seeing her as Renee,
mhm,
and when they're confronting Mr. Eddie with this video footage of like a party,
mhm.
and he's essentially he's they're next to the projector and they're watching a porn of her, but he's also looks like he's either dry humping her or he's fucking her at the party.
Mhm.
Since it looks like Renee, or at least he's allowed himself to know that it is Renee, do you
Mhm.
consider that just a continuation of the fantasy where he's allowing himself to see Renee? Or do you consider that
So like I
information,
okay, I'm
or do you consider that information based on the past, and that yes, not just in the fantasy but in the real world, Renee did porn,
oh
and that's the
yeah,
history, and that's why
just
he's so
like well yeah
jealous.
well because yeah you do hear those stories about like you know people in porn like and the jealousy like how it's difficult to have relationships like wasn't that like in Boogie Nights I think that was like one of the less leaned on it was one of the omitted um plot lines though it was I can't remember but just in general like that's a go or a stereotype or not a stereotype but a something you hear
Or
about the
the
adult
difficulty of having quote unquote
yeah
normal, really. Yeah, there was an episode of Sports Night where he where Jeremy dates a porn star for a few episodes, and it's hard.
mm-hmm. Literally.
um no, just because to me, if how much of that third act is based on memory, I just to me, if he is an unreliable narrator in Act One, that's why she's in the
Mhm,
porn shoes, and that's why he's
mhm,
hung up on the job she got. I don't know. It's just something to consider that that if she does have an actual porn past,
mhm,
um, maybe that's why the the truth comes in the form of videotape, is
mhm.
because just in his head that is how he physically manifests the idea of confessions or true
Pornography.
things. Yeah, as a porno tape. Hey kid.
You like porno? Get you like give you a boner or whatever he said.
That is so like I remember when he said that, it felt so strange to me now, because only through the modern prism of you can literally just watch porn on any digital device, that
Mhm,
the idea of offering porn to someone now is absurd. But I'm like, oh yeah, wait, that was the 90s. You still
mhm,
had to like get a copy of it from someone.
mhm. Whole different section of the video store.
Video stores, remember those?
Yeah, I'm trying to make something happen. Maybe hint hint.
Yeah, do you have anything else you want to throw in the ring? Any
Um,
musings?
well, David Lynch is a genius. Um, for sure, he's gonna have a secret film at Cannes this year, for
That's what I
sure.
heard last year.
um, huh. I mean, I legendarily I love I almost because the arc of um was it Wild at Heart won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Fire Walk with Me was booed at Cannes, and this being his follow up to that, like almost like, all right, fuck it, this is almost like a fuck it movie, um, to the degree that the poster
Ah,
with the two thumbs down
yes.
from Siskel and Ebert, he's all, this is punk rock, David Lynch,
I mean, there was a whole period of my life where I was so informed about movies that I hadn't seen,
Mhm.
but I could still sort of root for them because of just Entertainment Weekly.
Mhm.
Because I remember when it was one thing that when Siskel and Ebert didn't like it, but I remember reading an article, one of those like little mini blurbs, in Entertainment Weekly. It was like a news item for the week, and it was like, "Hey, they're leaning in on that for their poster. Aren't they neat?" I
Mhm.
carried that with me for just like 2 or 3 years. Like, this movie's awesome. Have you seen it? No, but they put two thumbs down on their poster, so fucking right on.
Yeah. Um, Also, I guess, do you or um, I guess I was reading his book about meditation as I go to my notes on my phone. Um, where was it? His first wife and the starting of meditating, and it, oh yeah, just that he had a lot of anger. Lynch himself, he describes having a lot of anger during his first marriage and thinking about that in relation to this story. And that once he started meditating, he remembers his ex-wife saying, "Where did the anger go?" Like that, like he was a very that she just, I guess he was this legendarily angry man, and then he changed, and so I wonder how much of that angry period is reflected in this movie. And then also the fact that they filmed it in his house. That's his house. At the start, where
Oh,
he already owned two houses next to each other, and then his neighbor died, and he bought his. So this is the third house. So his neighbor died, and he's like, "Ooh, I'm gonna buy that house too, and keep it going, and that could be my like art studio and like music studio and painting studio." And so it had there presently. It was like during the renovation process, but they're all like, he had this idea for, like, oh, I want the windows here, da da da. And like, David, you're kind of describing that new house you just bought. Could we just film there? And so, okay, so yeah, that is David Lynch's house, that Pullman and Arquette live in.
I think I read somewhere that some of the furniture was his, some of the
Mhm.
decor, and I know like the paintings above their
Mhm.
couch were
Mhm.
all stuff that he had. I know that's interesting
Yeah.
because it's such a. I mean that going from that living room to that, it's a Z. It's like a living room, hallway, bedroom.
Mhm.
And they make such great use of traveling through that hallway, both in his dream, in the actual murder, in the videotape reveal. Like
Mhm.
the geography of that apartment really matters to that movie. That's
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. And then
I wonder. This is the littlest thing that bugs me was they would always sit to watch the TV, but he would
mhm.
always his VCR or his DVD player, his clicker, his receiver was all to the right, and I was always so like as a home theater person, I'm so used to like TV player
It's
receiver, like
all.
you're pointing the remote at the thing,
Mhm.
and it's always so jarring for me that
Mhm.
like he has to turn and then turn back to the TV, and I wonder if that's how Lynch had it laid out too.
Maybe,
Just
but
weird. It's a weird
yeah.
little thing. Also, the TV isn't like on a any kind of home entertainment center, or even just like a dresser. It's on like these two little painted blocks of things. I wanted, does David Lynch watch his TV like on the ground on two little blocks?
Well, I mean, he said he likes, TV, he wants people to watch things on the biggest screen possible. So I maybe if you can like, get down there, maybe he wants to be on the ground close to it. I don't know how that would work.
Yeah, I know.
I do want to shout out Peter Deming, the cinematographer. Um, I am a total sucker for hall or the way walls are lit in David Lynch films, like the fall off, from bright to dark. And this was it on the air, and was it Hotel Room, or the shows, the Lynch TV shows that nobody talks about because they were, but I've yet to see any of them, but I've heard nothing really too remarkable about any of them. But he did some episodes of that, and then Lynch he's like, this was the first feature they did together, and he's done pretty much everything except this. He didn't do the Straight Story, but he did Mulholland Drive, and I think he even did the Duran Duran concert film that Lynch did. He was the cinematographer on that, and then on Twin Peaks: The Return.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the walls. To me, one of the more interesting things is just the way the movie opens, where not opens, but after the opening credits, you see Fred almost in darkness smoking.
Last
And
thing I
then
heard was after the opening credits. You froze.
after the opening credits, we just start on Fred in darkness smoking a cigarette. It's very theatrical, like when like we're starting a show, because literally the light comes on. It's one of the few times we're in a, I don't know, it doesn't feel just like a curtain's opening, off, although it very well could just be someone opening a curtain, but it's one of the few times where it feels like I'm watching a movie, like in a very Baz Luhrmann sort of, I want you to know you're watching a movie. We're going to start on dark, and we're going to bring the lights up on him. It's one thing when his fantasy is literally like a curtain that parts, but the fact that, okay, now I'm just kind of connecting the dots, but if the idea is he's an unreliable narrator, the fantasy is a story, and how much of Act 1 is a story, Act 2 starts with the curtain parting. I think it's maybe it's intentional that Act 1 starts with lights on our stage. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Just an idea. Could be grasping for straws, but I don't know.
But no, yeah. David Lynch, good filmmaker.
He knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Hopefully he's doing something. I really, really, really hope we get something out of him.
You just got like, oh, well, not just because I feel like it was yesterday, but you just got like 17 hours of Twin Peaks. And you're still not satisfied with your 17-hour movie?
No, because he's still alive.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
could be making more.
Yeah.
But I do think, I don't know if he'll be able to top Twin Peaks: The Return, because I actually do consider that probably the masterpiece. But so whatever follows will probably be viewed as a come down, or a like, but
I mean, depends on, that's such a big, huge swing, and it's such a big connect. I don't know, sometimes there can be intentional. It's a weird example, but like, how do you follow up Pulp Fiction? How do you top Pulp Fiction? You don't. I'm just gonna tell a much smaller story, much more modestly. And I mean, if I was gonna try to follow up Twin Peaks with anything, that's how I'd go.
Yeah. I mean, my suspicion is it'll be something more along the lines of Inland Empire. I think he appreciates, or he likes having time, because like Eraserhead, he spent 5 years making that. But part of that was due to the money not being there, and having to wait. And like I think he said, like there was like one shot of like Henry outside a door, and it was a year between him shooting him outside the door and him
Oh
entering the
God. Yeah.
door. But I think he does like that because like in the behind the scenes docs that are on the Twin Peaks return set, he seems really, like frustrated by the lack of, or the schedule that they have to maintain. Like, we need to keep going. He's like, why? I want to take some time, here. Like, and so I think possibly as a reaction to that, whatever he is or is not working on currently is going to be very deliberately at his own pace.
Here's what I'm hoping for. Feature length version of What Did Jack Do?
Oh, that reminds me of bringing up a short that I also think maybe pertains to Lost Highway that I forgot to mention was did you ever the short he did so in 1995 they were celebrating 100 years of the movies, because it was the anniversary of the 1895, the first public screening of the Lumiere brothers shorts, the workers leaving the factory, train arriving at station, all that. And the way they commemorated that was they let a bunch of different filmmakers from all over the world use the Lumiere brothers camera and said, okay, you get one roll of film and I think they got 3 rolls of film. So you get 3 takes and it's got to be a continuous shot, no edits. Here, make something. And Lynch is considered the most ambitious because his, he stayed true to the no edits, but there are sort of in-camera edits. Like he had a series of different sets and it goes from one to the other with like different transitions, but in-camera transition. And it's like this weird, like it goes back and forth between like a family like watching a TV and then like like creatures like torturing someone and then to like police arriving and stuff like that. But the title I think is very it's great if you've ever seen it, but is really relevant to Lost Highway. The title of that film is Premonitions Following the Commission of an Evil Deed, I believe. And that also could be the title to Lost Highway. And that was the movie he made.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's only 2 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly.
no, it could even be like Lost Highway or Premonitions of, your Dr. Strangelove title. Yeah. Well,
Pablo Ferro.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
This has been fun. Where can they find you? On Instagram? Yeah.
Well, my Instagram's set to private.
Okay, so do you have anything public you want them to find you at?
If I like you, I'll let you, follow me on Instagram.
Are you still on Twitter?
Yeah, I am still on Twitter. In all of us with our I never had a blue check mark to begin with, but yes, at cinematic. What is I never
thiscinematiclife.com? No, this cinematic life.
Oh yeah, well, you could definitely go to the blog. Yes. Oh, I was like, where does the underscore go in my Twitter handle? At cinematic_life. Yeah,
you did it.
Yeah, but yeah, Read the blog. I probably maybe my wife and I were parents, so uh, probably gets updated quarterly.
Right.
For a
And
blog that used
and
to
the
be 4 times
intention
a week.
the intention of the blog is morphed into like we're cinematic parents now.
Yes. You mentioned earlier the my books, and there's talk between uh, me more so, and then my wife. I try to. She's like, "What with what time?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, we could do this. The third book would be us together, you know." And she's like, "Yeah, but with what spare time?" But yeah, vague ideas of a third book focused on the cinephile parenting stuff.
Just pull a card from David Lynch and just take your time.
Mhm.
There's
Deep.
no schedule.
I'll take a yes. I'll take a cue from Mr. Lynch, and I'll release the third book on my daughter's graduation day from high school.
Perfect. You've got some time then.
Thank you
Uh,
for having me, Carlos.
yeah, man. Yeah. So that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody. You've never done this before, but I usually end my videos by going. So you
Oh.
you got to witness that.